Ladies and gentlemen, if I can request you all to please be seated. We also have people online joining us, so people will be quite eagerly waiting online. Thank you. So, good afternoon again. His Excellency, Mr. Gitesh Sharma, Consul General, Mr. Manish Gupta, Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Bryce, he's online from India, from Australian High Commission, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's an extreme honor and privilege for us to actually have you here with us this afternoon. To share you a few moments and basically look at the entire objective is going to be around the infrastructure space and the opportunities that exist between India and Australia. So we have some great examples of companies who are participating on both sides and how we can engage. The potential for us to go forward. I think this is what we're going to be looking at here today. And this is an inaugural session. It basically will provide a platform for future communications between the two countries, between the stakeholders from both sides. And the Consul General of Sydney here, the embassy, Indian Embassy, Australian India Business Council, it's an extreme privilege to be part of the journey with everyone. So before I proceed any further, actually, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which we are assembled here today, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. Just a couple of key logistics before we proceed. We have taken every possible care in terms of COVID. We have taken the necessary controls, tried to maintain the number of people in the room. We have people being logged in terms of registered people who have walked in. If anybody is uncomfortable, would like to use a mask, please raise your hand. Somebody will get you a mask. We also got some hand sanitizers on your table if you wish to use them. So if there's at any point in time, any concerns, please do express, and we would be quite glad to take care of those concerns. In terms of the facilities, it's very straightforward. I guess this is for people in the room here, and I'm sure people online must be wondering what I'm talking about this bit. So the facilities for the ladies and gents are just outside the room. To the left you go for the ladies, and the right, the gentlemen here. And please stay for the session will proceed till about 6:30, and we have like half an hour for Q&A at the end. Please stay for the Q&A session. It's an opportunity to try and ask a few questions of the speakers who are participating. We have a wonderful line of speakers here today who are very successful businesses who are making an impression in the relationship between the two countries. So basically, it's a good time for me now to actually invite His Excellency, I would like to actually get Consul General Mr. Manish Gupta to speak, to welcome you all to the stadium. Mr. Manish Gupta. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to warmly welcome all of you today at the consulate premises. The new year we have started on a very optimistic note with new hopes and great expectations as humanity emerges from the COVID pandemic. The mood is quite upbeat for my colleagues over here as well as back home in India. Like rest of the world, in India, our vaccination program has started, and even in the initial stages, we are vaccinating close to 1.5 million people a day. So we are pretty hopeful for the year, but I'm really happy to see this is one of the big business events we are organizing today, this year, in the consulate premises. And we see distinguished members of Australian business and industry, Indian business and industry joining us today. I'm immensely grateful to our High Commissioner, sir, who has joined all the way from Canberra, my colleagues in the Australian High Commission in Delhi, my counterpart, Julia Niblet, State Director DFED, who are here with us. Each one of you represents diverse sections of the business, and if I may mention also, the Indian public sector banks, two of the biggest ones, State Bank of India as well as Bank of Baroda representatives are also joining us here today. So we look forward to a very frank, open and engaging discussion. As I always say, when we talk about Brand India, it's not about something very inward looking. It's something about ready to expand, collaborate and cooperate, making wider horizons with the rest of the world. And as I say, the mood, when I say the economic mood in India is also quite upbeat. This year, we are looking like in Australia, a V-shaped economic recovery back home in India. IMF forecasts that the economy is likely to grow by 11.5% this year. So let's build upon these foundations. Last year, there has been momentous developments in our relationship, and I am certain that our panelists and our High Commissioner are going to provide you detailed inferences in that regard. I wish you all a very fruitful, productive evening today. Thank you.
Thank you, Consul General. Really appreciate it. Actually, one of the good points he made there, in terms of India, when you talk brand India, you talk about colors, a lot of colors. I think if you look around this room, there's no shortage of colors. So, can I please invite the High Commissioner, Mr. Gita Sharma, for the keynote address, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think our Consul General has set the tone, and in many ways, my longish speech here summed up extempore in a few words. So he said everything that needs to be said. But it's wonderful that we are meeting. I think that's the first part, that we are today in this room meeting, and it looks like there is some light at the end of the tunnel. And we're already talking and thinking of business in more normal ways. So in that sense, I'm greatly encouraged to see this gathering, and it's also in hybrid mode. So we have people joining in from elsewhere, long distance. So welcome to each one of you. I'm indeed delighted to be here for this Australia-India Infrastructure Network meeting. And my compliments go out to AIBC for jointly organizing this interaction with us. And we always value your support. And we also value our Consul General, our hardworking Consul General, who is always open to anything which promotes India-Australia cooperation. We have entered this year. I shan't use the word new year because it's already 3 months down the road. But it is, phase of recovery. We have recovered from the initial impact. We have moved along, and now with these vaccines, which Manish has referred to, it's looking that we are on the right track. India has already vaccinated close to, I think, 25 million people, and with 1.5 million per day, that is, I think, settling into a nice trajectory. Australia is, of course, inspiration to the rest of the world by how to keep safe, to be safe, and its own economic trajectory is the envy of many. The government has taken very good steps to keep employment going, to keep the economy going, to keep the country safe. So we will use this opportunity to congratulate Australia. So our two countries really have much to talk about, although we are differently positioned. We have been adapting to changing circumstances. We have been responding to the challenges, sometimes in crisis mode, sometimes in others. But overall, focus is on long-term growth. I would say that we are also in a region which has the potential to drive growth. The Indo-Pacific region, whether you say Indo-Pacific or Asia or Oceania and Southeast Asia, in different combinations you look at it, but the world is looking towards us, and India and Australia will provide that kind of stability that we are so much yearning for. For the government of India, it is a priority to be an economic engine which will lead the world, and as Manish said, there is a forecast of almost 11%. But it's not enough to take satisfaction that 11% means huge kind of expectations in terms of infrastructure, demands on energy, for instance. How do you sustain the growth of that order? It has to be all kinds of energy in the basket. So several things to put together and to sustain that growth and to keep going. But countries like India, Australia, the bigger countries, because they have a nice combination of domestic and international markets to combine in the right proportions. So that I think is something that we all need to look forward to. If we look at a small thing again, since we have been talking about again and again about the vaccine, that itself will show that India has been one country which has been outward looking. We are among the largest suppliers of vaccine, and easily we could just concentrate on ourselves. But right from the start, the government of India has felt that we can't just think of ourselves. We are part of the global community, and whatever we do, it must be take into account the global needs. You've just had situations where shipments of vaccines to Australia were held back for various reasons. But in India, we have taken that line, although there have been other contrary expectations. So the same thing goes with the PPEs. In the difficult times when all of us were looking around, India did respond even to Australia's requirements of medicaments and protective equipment. All kinds of things were there, and we look to work with Australia. As far as India is concerned, pandemic is there and will be gone sometime. But the fact is that India will be there, Australia will be there, the world is there. We have to think of a world beyond and above the pandemic. So India's resilience is actually aided by unprecedented reforms in various sectors. In fact, some of the spotlight on India is because we have taken some of the toughest measures. So this is a government which has shown the will to take very tough decisions. And this is a government which literally means business. We have, in the last few years, ushered in one nation and one tax system, with the GST coming into existence. One can again go on arguing, is this the best kind of framework or some improvements are necessary. But the difficult thing has been done. The constitutional aspects has been done, and the fine-tuning, which are more in the nature of administrative adjustments, that is a continuous process. So that makes us one common market with uniform taxation, and one of the largest, if you say, 1.3 billion people covering that, and only going in a certain direction. The trajectory is positive. So I think that is something that we mustn't lose sight of. It's a huge market. You have to enter, and then it's all for you to take advantage of. We are also easing various kinds of business procedures. India has jumped several ranks in the ease of business rankings. Global surveys have all shown, and this means that fewer people need to turn up in government offices waiting for their permissions and clearances. Many things are now done in automated form. We also have state governments, you'll find rankings of states also in various ways. It's good to have a competitive environment where states are competing for business, for the same business. They are all coming forward. I myself, many years back, was associated with the rise of the IT industry, and I found that there is a lot of scope in state governments, like I would imagine in Australia. It's not just providing clearances, but hand-holding, where you need certain kinds of, support in terms of land, or in terms of, certain kinds of power lines coming to your perimeter of your facility. So there is that element that there are certain states which are considered more dynamic, and others, maybe need to improve a little. But the fact is that it is open for you to make those choices, but you have that huge market waiting for you. There is never a kind of perfect moment to when to enter business, to jump into the Indian market. Perfect moment is when you jump into India. That's a perfect moment. So you have to make those decisions and take the call. But it's really, India would be waiting to handhold you. Our two countries have, of course, a very special relationship. As a High Commissioner, I'd say this delight that I just have to, be part of this, jump onto this running train. But India and Australia have been moving so beautifully together, in tandem, absolutely in tandem. We have a natural and comfortable relationship, shared values, shared approaches to various issues, and economic complementarities. One of the things I did a year back was to travel to Perth, and I was a little nervous. I had a meeting with the governor, the wonderful Kim Beazley, and I couldn't miss, I could risk even the COVID-19, the initial days, in going across. But it was a fantastic moment to go to Fremantle and take out my iPhone and look at which side is India. And there's an unobstructed line towards India, no islands, nothing in between. Geography is not just about understanding, it's about sensing and feeling. So that's about India and Australia. We don't sufficiently realize that Australia is an Indian Ocean country, and we are close. Some of those people who export coal would tell you that getting coal down from, we have plenty of coal ourselves, but getting it from Eastern India is sometimes more expensive than getting it from Australia. So when the economics comes into play, then you'll find great kind of partnerships building up. Here I would also like to say something that we are not a country which can really direct people to go and do business with this country or that country. Business will find its own direction where those advantages are there. But similarly, we are not a country which can say stop business with this country. So I won't elaborate further on that, but that is the way that India is. It's more similar to a country like Australia than any other country. And if you think of India like Australia, I do hear, I came about a little over a year and a half back, and I think it must be the same room, and I do remember some Indian businessmen also telling me about the challenges that they were facing in Australia. and those companies are well known. But the message was same to them, that when you're in business, you have to keep at it. If you see business prospects, if you see economic potential, if you see commercial benefits, there's nothing but to stay in the race, to stay in the game. So that's the same message that all kinds of, sitting and, speculating, it might be like this or like, you have to be in there and you have to put your hands in that grime if there is grime. But believe me that when I worked with the IT sector, with the Microsoft and the Googles and all, when they set up shop there, they took all those tough decisions, and today, they are benefiting considerably by accessing India's, resources and talents. So that's a kind of message that I would like to give, that dive into it. This will go on, that speculation. But nothing like visiting India, nothing like engaging with your counterparts. Even today, I would imagine that opportunity would excite you. We are jointly committed to an expanded trade and investment relationship, which will benefit both economies. There is already, we had this last year, the virtual summit between India and Australia at the Prime Minister's level, and we are working on an economic cooperation agreement, but even otherwise, Australia has a huge trade surplus compared with India. So we are not a closed country in that way. I think 3 times more Australia exports, even without an agreement. So it's not one of those countries which sets up barriers. And I always give this example that it's, if we look at as one foreign product which we rarely realize that it is foreign, but so much associated with India, we have imbibed it, we have absorbed it, and we have taken it as our own, is a chili which came from, I think, Latin America, and everybody thinks it's Indian. Not more than 300 years old, I think, in India. We have several wonderful colleagues here today, so I'm sure they will contribute hugely to these discussions. But I do realize that even some of these infrastructure projects that we pride ourselves in, I'm discovering that they have Australian connections. There's for instance, there's a tunnel in the high mountains, Himalayan mountains, recently inaugurated, I think last year, and state-of-art engineering marvel in Himachal Pradesh, which is high in 10,000 feet above mean sea level. And I'm told that Snowy Mountains Engineering Corporation Australia was a partner. So this is something that needs to come out more loudly and more visibly. We always, when it comes to Australia, sometimes blood pressures rise, cricket matches, decisions, DRS, etc., etc. But the fact is, we think of each other so much when we are playing cricket. But when you're building stadiums, also we are working together. And recently, India had 2 victories in a stadium in Western India, Ahmedabad, Gujarat, and that stadium was built in collaboration with Australian firm, I think Brisbane headquartered. Populous was the architect. I don't know if it was designed to ensure Indian victories all the time, but definitely it's Donald Trump also was there to inaugurate this stadium a few months back. So that's those are few examples really that Australia is there, already is there. There are signs that things are moving, but something tells me this is not enough. Of course, good examples inspire others to come, but I keep coming back to this message that let's not keep saying that this needs to be improved or that needs to be done. Typical, I found that when you go in, the government is very, very receptive, and if you go to state governments, the individual places where decisions are made in terms of providing support, they're so open. And one of the things I've seen is so much excitement about being part of this global economic processes. Some of these isolated places also, when you go into these offices, there's tremendous excitement that we are part of this international process, and companies are coming, and we must be very, very open to their concerns. So I strongly encourage you to look at India, come back with ideas. It's not enough to say that this must improve, but tell us something specific. We are open to that, and definitely talk to Invest India itself, and they are also here to handhold, to expedite, to streamline, and generally provide those words of encouragement, which is always a matter of comfort. At the end, I thank you, Consulate and ABC for this great opportunity, this great event, and I wish everyone productive and happy deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency. I think you set a great platform for the event this evening. I think about the pitch, you would wonder, because the matches got over in 2 and 3 days. And the Australians involved in the design of that pitch and the stadium. And they probably knew English were going to be playing the first couple of games, so kind of a great thing. So I think we're going to have fun for the Ashes this year, I guess, later this year. So I would like to actually invite Deputy High Commissioner Mr. Bryce Hutchison. Mr. Bryce Hutchison will be joining us from Delhi. He is with the Australian High Commission. And please, Mr. Hutchison, yes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Anand Singh, and good morning from the Australian High Commission in Delhi. Good afternoon to all of you in Australia. I first visited India in 1983. I served here as a diplomat 2 decades ago, and I've visited many times, both for work purposes and privately in the years since. But it's a particular pleasure for me, having witnessed the relationship go through ups and downs over so many years, to be back here now in India, where without a shadow of a doubt, I think we could say the relationship in many facets is at an all-time high. I'd like to begin by extending congratulations to the Australia-India Business Council for organising this session on infrastructure opportunities between our two countries. I also acknowledge the very insightful and committed remarks by my diplomatic colleague, His Excellency Mr. Githesh Sharma, and of course Indian Consul General in Sydney, Mr. Manish Gupta. When our Prime Ministers agreed to elevate the relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership last June, infrastructure was in fact identified as one of the priorities for commercial cooperation. The India Economic Strategy, authored by former Australian High Commissioner to India, Peter Varghese, had also highlighted the substantial opportunity for closer links in infrastructure, as indeed did the counterpart in Australian Economic Strategy, authored by former senior Indian diplomat Anil Wadhwa and published by the Indian Confederation of Indian Industries in December of just last year. So I commend those two strategies to those of you who are looking at pointers for how to proceed. In recognition of opportunities in the infrastructure sector, infrastructure will be a key focus for Austrade's 2021 Australia-India Business Exchange, ABEX as we know it. This is the flagship trade and investment promotion program, which Austrade will be coordinating to deliver a series of initiatives to showcase Australian capability and to connect businesses. This will be launched, we expect, in April, and there will be opportunities and showcase opportunities and connection opportunities through that month and into May of this year. So I do encourage you to reach out to Austrade if you're interested in more information on that. Investment in infrastructure is really central to the economic growth agenda for both our countries. In Australia, Infrastructure Australia has recently published a priority list of 44 new infrastructure proposals for our cities, regions and remote communities, and this provides a $59 billion pipeline of investment opportunities across energy, water, digital connectivity and the digital health sectors. So we'd certainly welcome Indian investment and involvement in projects, those various projects. Again, talk to Austrade, who'd be very happy to share more information. But I wanted to talk mainly about India and about the ambitious infrastructure program that we see here and the opportunities for Australia and Australian business here. India's own infrastructure program entails earmarked projects valued something in the order of a combined 2.1 trillion Australian dollars for development by 2023. So just in the next couple of years, that's a huge pipeline of possibility. We're already seeing Australian companies such as the Macquarie Group investing significantly in Indian infrastructure. Australia's got world-class services and technology capabilities that can support a range of India's infrastructure projects. In that context, with our Indian partners, we're looking to hone in on opportunities in three key subsectors, and I'll talk a little bit about them: urban infrastructure, transport, and water. India has an urban population in excess of 400 million people, growing fast, an ambitious smart cities agenda, all of which means that India's demand for quality and innovative urban infrastructure solutions is immense. Australian companies have the capabilities to support India's urban expansion, whether it be in architectural design services, building management solutions, construction technology, sustainability services, and more. There's already a number of successes to point to. High Commissioner Sharma has already mentioned the Australian architecture firm Populous that designed the iconic stadium, Motera Stadium, now named the Narendra Modi Stadium in Gujarat, which saw our common rivals, the Brits, recently humbled. Australia's secure parking now operates 165 car parks across 25 cities in India, handling 3 million vehicles a month, employing 3,500 people. The second area of focus that I wanted to touch on is transport infrastructure, particularly rail infrastructure. The Indian government's investing to expand and upgrade railways, including through dedicated freight corridors, regional rapid transport systems, and passenger train privatisation. And again, Australia's got expertise to offer in these areas: sophisticated passenger and heavy haul rail networks covering areas such as traffic management, digital solutions, systems monitoring and safety. And again, there's some real successes to point to in this field. SIDAC, an Australian simulator solutions company, has supported Indian railways with state-of-the-art driving simulators. And TrackBlaze is supplying mobile and static weighing solutions to multiple Indian public and private partners. The third subsector I wanted to talk about is water infrastructure. Access to safe and reliable water is one of the world's most pressing challenges, and both of our countries have more experience than most when it comes to grappling with water-related challenges. India is seeking to upgrade dams, aquifers, rivers and canal systems, including through major initiatives such as the World Bank-funded Dam Rehabilitation and Improvement Project. And in this field, several Australian firms have partnered with Indian companies to provide solutions in river basin management, aquifer mapping, flood forecasting and water flow modelling. Australia's Rubicon Water, for example, has invested substantially in India and is providing services that improve water efficiency for agricultural regions. We're also working at the government-to-government level to promote engagement in this area. The Australia-India Water Security Initiative delivers on our commitment to strengthen water security cooperation. Australia's providing funding of $10 million for that particular initiative, and this will facilitate exchange of the latest tools and technologies to safeguard water supply to India's fastest growing cities, and ultimately this will also support expanded commercial partnerships. So across these particular subsectors that I've highlighted, urban infrastructure, transport and water, and more broadly, the opportunities are many, and as we heard from High Commissioner Sharma, the commitment from both sides is strong and in fact stronger than ever before. I expect that as our countries continue to recover from this terrible pandemic, and as the High Commissioner said, we hope, seeing light at the end of the tunnel. The potential for lucrative, productive investment in infrastructure can only grow, and we look forward to sustained engagement with Indian partners to realise the potential in this and in the economic relationship more broadly. I'll conclude my remarks at that point. I thank the AIBC for providing the opportunity to participate in this event, and I look forward to hearing very much now the observations, the experiences, the insights that various businesses who are here today can provide on their experiences in investing in India or Australia and partnering to pursue that. So looking forward to that, and looking forward to a very productive session for the next hour or so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy High Commissioner. I'm also grateful that you actually made reference to the two strategy documents, the India Economic Strategy as well as the Australian Economic Strategy, in the focus. I actually remember High Commissioner Barry O'Farrell was referring to Mr. Peter Verghese and Mr. Wadhwa, the two gentlemen who are actively involved in developing those documents, as Simon and Garfunkel. So it was quite interesting the way he drew it. But yeah, those documents are quite adequately describe the opportunities between the two regions, and infrastructure does play a very significant part in the whole documents. So the way we set up the session today is we have the government now represented. We have the High Commissioner, Consul General, and the Deputy High Commissioner. We go the next level down where we have bodies who are quite actively representing the government but working very closely with the industry. So we have Greater Sydney Commission, and then we have Invest India, sharing about the opportunities that exist. To begin with, I'll be inviting Troy from Greater Sydney Commission, Troy Daly, who's an executive director. He's actually been quite engaged with the Greater Sydney Commission, as most of us have heard about the three cities story in Greater Sydney and how the developments that are taking place. I think the whole vision came from Lucy Turnbull, who was a mayor of Sydney at one stage, and then she took on this role and did an amazing job of describing the three cities. And having been closely involved with some of those activities myself as a part of the organization, I was actually quite delighted to see the prospects with that. And Troy Daly would actually be talking about some of the opportunities in that space. So could I please have you here? Thank you, Troy.
Thanks, Nan. Might just go to the first slide, if that's okay. So, as a young man, a long while ago in Sydney, everything was about the east, the harbour city. It's where the tall buildings were, commercial buildings. It's where the economic centre of activity was. It's where the train lines in straight lines pretty much came into, and there was a horrific arm wrestle on getting motorways in there at one point in one decade as well. Interestingly enough, a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago, 2018, an interesting thing happened that Anand has referred to. The thinking in the city changed quite radically, mainly because we understood that we couldn't work forever off an eastern city and have everything happening there. And from that was born this strategy to create Sydney as a city of three cities. With Parramatta in the middle and Greater Parramatta, or what we call the Central River City. And then importantly, based on the airport and based on the existing growth centres, the Western Parkland City as well. In 2018, the other interesting thing that happened is that it's probably the first time in a long time, if ever, that the actual infrastructure agency, being AIINSW, the Transport Agency and the Planning Agency ourselves worked together to ensure that infrastructure was aligned with urban growth, was aligned with transport as the major infrastructure asset as well. Fairly seminal things to actually happen there at the time. Of course now, and you might have heard Jeff Roberts a couple of weeks ago say, the ambition is that each of these cities is a global city, meaning that each of them effectively will have global connections and global export markets and specialisations that actually allow that to occur. The interesting thing, I think, by inference for infrastructure too, is that rather than everything heading to the east, everything now goes to the east, but it also goes to the west. So the latent capacity in a lot of infrastructure heading in one direction, transport capacity-wise and capacity on roads, etc., changes quite radically in terms of the throughput you can put on that infrastructure. Notwithstanding, I might go to the next slide, please. Notwithstanding that fact, the amount of infrastructure spend is quite significant, and our role that we've been asked to take on last year at the Commission really is to look very carefully at the economic growth engine that sits in each of these cities. and actually make sure that you have the economic activity that follows through with the infrastructure investment. So I'll just touch really quickly on the two precincts I'm looking at the moment. First one is Tech Central. Its specialisation, if you like, in terms of the common theme, is all things digital services. But of course, digital services touch just about every industry sector. So it's an important glue between everything. People probably heard that Atlassian have stepped up as an anchor tenant. There'll be a range of other anchor tenants that actually coming into the Tech Central area. Of course, from an infrastructure point of view for us in that part of the world, obviously most of the stuff's on the ground. It's not to say that new metro stations, etc., won't be required and that connectivity will be important. But for us, if you ask what the highest priority from an infrastructure point of view, it would be digital services. We'd be very keen to see bleeding edge 5G networks linking up or even replacing fibre, if you like, at some point as well. And we want basically an R&D overlay sitting over that network as well. When we move to the middle city, Westmead, Sydney has a really comprehensive series of health centres at Randwick, at RPA Camperdown, at Westmead and growing at Liverpool. There is a focus at Westmead. At Westmead, there's a latent capacity for it to grow. There's a number of technologies, biotech inventions there that are particularly critical and have massive global markets. So at Westmead, the deal here is to actually add an extra layer to Greater Parramatta and actually build out that health space. It obviously has a new metro line going in there. At some point, there'll be talk of other metro lines going in there. I'm positive it has light rail going in there at the moment as well. It will need increased services from electricity supply, gas supply, and digital services as well. I think digital services is a thing that happens everywhere here. Again, so Westmead in the middle and Greater Parramatta in the middle, you've got a lot of infrastructure in place. You have a lot of infrastructure being built, a lot to be built. As you move to the west, it gets very interesting, of course. A massive leap of faith from the government to anoint a new north-south metro line running through the new Aerotropolis. A massive bet on a new airport, clearly as well. And now a massive investment of time and effort to actually pull together what the whole employment and the whole industry story is around that Aerotropolis as well. And then, of course, how the surrounding major towns pin in with that too. It was funny for me. I worked on the city deal in the Aerotropolis right at its inception, and I remember picking up the phone at the time to one of the incumbent electricity distributors out there and saying, "Well, have you heard about this?" And they sort of said, "Well, we've vaguely heard about it." And I said, "Well, what are your thoughts?" What do you mean? What are your thoughts? I'm like, "Well, it's a chance to do something different." And like, what does that mean? Well, can we totally rethink how utilities are provided? How we can actually put a smarter network together, how we just don't roll out massive substations based on demand and we look more at demand management. And even then, it wasn't even being thought about. But I think thankfully now, through the good people that are working on this area, the ability to build this place out as your exemplar as a smart city with smart infrastructure, with smart demand management on every level of infrastructure is all an opportunity in the Aerotropolis. Everything to be built, everything an opportunity basically. So at that point, I'd probably leave it there, Anand, and leave it open. Yeah. So please, keen to hear from everyone. Yeah.
Great. No, thank you. Thanks, Troy. Greatly appreciate it. I know during the Q&A sessions, if anybody wants to ask a question from the room here, please don't hesitate. There's a good few things happening in that space, especially like you mentioned about the digital technologies that can play a big part. Thanks again. We'll next go on to Invest India. I must admit, I've been here for almost 29 years now. But every time I hear about what's happening in India and the opportunities that are there, and every time I read about it, it's kind of quite exciting. It's just like, it's mind-blowing. It's you wonder, can that really happen in India? Like, I come from Bangalore. The kind of activities that are happening there just incredible. But I think the best person to talk about that would be Ms. Prerna, who will be our next speaker here. I think in terms of the only thing I would like to say, we have her bio there. One thing is she's been quite recognized for her contribution towards India's first asset recycling program. I think especially in New South Wales, we understand that quite well. So I would like to welcome Ms. Prerna. I'll hand over to.
Thank you so much, Anand. I hope I am visible and audible both.
You are audible, of course, but visible?
That's fine.
Yeah.
If I can have my presentation on.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
While I wait for the presentation, I totally agree with you, Anand. I think it is absolutely exciting. I've been working with Invest India for over 5 years now, and every time I start talking about infrastructure and what the growth story about the country is, it indeed gives me goosebumps. The kind of ambitions that we have been able to put for the country out there, and the fact that India is actually working to achieve it, is something absolutely mind-blowing for us. With that note, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Prerna Soni again. I represent an organization called Invest India. This is the National Investment Promotion and Facilitation Agency of the Government of India. And our focus is to get investments in the country across all sectors from all countries. My forte is to get investments into the infrastructure and construction sectors within the country. And I work with all institutional investors per se, who are sovereigns and pensions who are looking to invest in the country. Before I start talking about infrastructure per se, we could move on to the next slide. I think, we talk a lot about the country. I just wanted to put a little perspective to why India. Why is there so much talk about the growth story in the country, the fact that we're talking about a new India? And we at Invest India believes that's primarily because of three main reasons. One is the social, the other is political, and the third is the economic transformation that was happening in the country, which the government saw and put it all together to integrate and develop the Indian growth story to make sure that from the lower rung of the hockey stick, we start moving upwards. If you look at this slide, you'll realize that while we have the largest democracy, the fact that we put it to use with 600 million voters coming into vote, the fact that we have the youngest workforce which is going to serve the entire globe, the fact that we have a consumption story of $4 trillion by 2025, making us one of the largest economies and a very resource-rich country. These reasons together, the social, political, economic stability that we're talking about in the country, is really the reason that India is the word and the country where everybody would want to invest. If we move on to the next slide, it just puts a little perspective to what really is happening in the country. If we talk about the fact that, we were the first country to have 850 million internet users. The interesting part is that while we have the largest internet user base in the country, we have the second largest non-internet user base as well, which gives you the scope and the potential for growth. The minute those guys also come in on the internet, the scale, Troy was talking about digitization. The fact that India is talking about data centers, which is a part of infrastructure, the kind of digitization moves that we have in the country, the fact that there is a focus within India that every individual, which is 1.3 billion people, need to have a bank account, a unique identity number, and a mobile, which helps them enter the digital world, just talks about the scope that the Indian country has to offer. If I talk about the two grids in the right, which is 110 million houses and 100 plus smart cities, I know this was referred to before, but just to give you a little bit of a perspective, 30 people move from a village to a city in India per minute, which means by 2024, we are going to have 863 million people who would be living in our cities. India, of course, realized well in time that we do not have the wherewithal to have as many people in our cities which exist, which is why we need to develop new cities, hence the 100 plus smart cities. If we talk about aviation as a market, India has had a CAGR of more than 24% for domestic aviation market in the last 4 years prior to COVID. That just goes on to talk about the growth and the establishment that India has been able to develop in the infrastructure space. If we move on to the next slide, I'd like to just showcase, how India is using all of these numbers together. So, for example, if we talk about being a very attractive destination, India is actually number one for greenfield FDI in the years 2015 and 2016. If I talk only about last year, we got more than 60 billion of FDI. More than 50% of that, interestingly, was from institutional investors. We had large sovereigns, pensions, private equity investing in the country. What the government did, when they looked at the transformation that was happening, they looked at the aspects of interest that was being generated within the country. There was a huge drive on making business easier in the country. As His Excellency was mentioning, India has actually moved up 79 places to be 63rd in the ease of doing business ranking in the country. But that's not it. There's a lot more that happened, and I think one of the greatest stories that we will talk about through the future is going to be the infrastructure development in the country, which I would want to talk about on the next slide. Thank you so much. So normally whenever emerging markets are looking at development of infrastructure, it's really very need-based. So if there's a demand for road in a particular area, or there is a requirement for capacity augmentation, a road would be developed or a rail line would be developed. Normally that's the perspective that usually emerging markets keep. India changed that, and India brought about a huge, significant ambitious pipeline, which is called the National Infrastructure Pipeline. This was launched early in 2020, wherein we decided that we will come up with infrastructure projects worth $1.4 trillion, which need to be completed by 2025. Any emerging market to come out, if we talk about the social requirements in India, we need countries like Australia already have housing for all, banking for all. You do not have a problem of no toilets for people. India had those concerns. With all of those social norms that need to be met, the fact that there was a huge budgetary allocation which needed to be made towards social causes in the country. Along with that, India actually allocated more than 25% of its every annual budget towards infrastructure development in the country, with the view that we need to achieve that target of 1.4 trillion. We've actually laid it down for the entire world to see, and for all of the country to see, that this is what we aim to achieve by 2025. There's a plan in place for every subsector that we've put under, which is roads, aviation, energy, shipping. And in all of these, the plan is to make sure that there is development happening over the next 5 years by 2025. And there is a plan for financing the amount of development that we're looking at it as well. If we move on to the next slide, I'd like to give you a little bit of a snippet of what really India is planning to do. So what you see on the map right now was the road structure that we had, the primary road structure that we had till 2014. We had a north, south, east, west grid, and we had a golden quadrilateral, which is the red line. This connected the main cities within the country. We actually had the second largest road network in the world, only with this, wherein the national highways were only 2%, but they were carrying more than 65% of the freight and passenger traffic, up to 80% for the country. The aspiration of where we would be reaching after the plan that we have under the National Infrastructure Pipeline is what you would see on the next page. So from that grid, the plan is to bring us to the grid that you now see on the map of the country. I'm sure you know that India has states or provinces, but in every state we also have clustered development, which are called districts. India has more than 570 districts, and the plan in the country as there will not be a single district which would not have a national highway within 5 kilometers range. That is the kind of plan that we have, for which additional 66,100 kilometer worth of roads are being developed in the country. Phase 1 of 24,800 kilometers is actually under construction, and phase 2 is going to come out really soon. The status here is a little outdated. Actually, phase 1 is under construction already. Now, if I talk about how is it that we are funding this huge plan, and how is it that we're developing the amount of roads that we're talking about, there are a lot of innovative aspects that we've come up with, and we have certainly learned from countries like Australia. We came out with a huge plan for monetization of our roads. Of course, we have Frank here who would talk about Macquarie's growth and the success that they've had with the first monetization India did. But we've been actually able to successfully close 5 of them. The idea is to do more monetizations in the future. And very interestingly, what we've also done is we've come up with a concept called InvIT. InvITs are infrastructure investment trusts, which are very similar to REITs, but just instead of real estate assets, we have infrastructure assets. We already have very successful REITs in the country. We have Shailesh from L&T who can talk about the extremely successful InvIT that L&T actually has in the country. Along with that, we have certain listed REITs of private companies. But what is interesting is that considering NHAI, which is the National Highways Authority of India, has a plan to develop these roads for which they need funding, they are doing their own InvIT in the future, which means that we would actually have at least 500 kilometers worth of national highways being put into this private InvIT again, which is going to be managed by the National Highways Authority of India. They are the guys who would be the sponsor, who would manage all of these roads. And this becomes a great opportunity for institutional investors who would want to come into the country and get exposure to the roads market. Along with the potential of partnering with Indian promoters, there is now a potential to actually partner with the government and invest in the road sector in the country. Moving on, if I talk about the rail sector on the next slide, I think His Excellency from the Australian High Commission in India really put it well about the kind of work that is happening on the railways within the country. But what is really exciting about the fact is that if you look at the history of Indian railways, a lot of work that was being done here was in the EPC contract. So one could come in, finish contracts and move out with the Indian Railways. It's for the first time that Indian Railways have changed their approach, and they're looking at partnerships and they are looking at PPP. I won't take too much time here, but if I talk about stations alone, we took aspiration from countries and cities like London, New York, Sydney, as a matter of fact, to see how your railway stations are used. It's not just a pure play of station. There is a play of real estate, there is a play of commercial, there is a play of hotels in all of your railway stations, which is exactly what we would want to do as well. And as a country, as Anand rightly said, we don't talk in small numbers. So here as well, we've identified 600 stations across the country, which are going to be redeveloped within the country. And the fact that you have airports which have an integrated view, wherein you would have, of course, along with flying, you have recreation, you have hotels, you have development of offices as well in some cities. That is something that we want to do around our railway stations, which are in the center of a lot of tier 2 and tier 3 cities in India. That would just change the entire ecosystem of a lot of these railway stations. In addition, of course, we are doing a dedicated freight corridor, which would again move in the same grid. We are doing high-speed rail. And if you look at the maps that I'm showing here, you'll realize that a lot of it is around the same regions. The western side of India is where the consumption base is. The eastern side is where our resources are. What we are doing with our road networks, with our rail network, and if I talk further about ports and aviation as well, is that we're integrating the entire ecosystem together to make sure, one, that our logistics costs go down, and second, the fact that all of our consumption and production centers are brought together and create one integrated infrastructure growth story for the country. If I move on to the next slide, which talks about ports and shipping in the country, what we've done is we've again learned from examples of other countries. We in fact looked at what China did in Shanghai, looking at the clusters and the amount of growth that happened around their ports. We've looked at what Australia was able to do. So what we did was, we have a coastline of more than 7,500 kilometers. We came up with a plan where we would build coastal economic zones, and if you see, there are 14 coastal economic zones which have already been identified. We know what are the resources available and what is it that these areas can work on. So if you look down south, absolutely on the left, you will see Cochin, which has a lot of bamboo and wood which can be used for furniture. So this has become a furniture cluster for us, and so forth. Again, while we already have 12 government ports and more than 200 private and state ports in the country, we are looking to privatize ports in India. 6 ports have already been identified. This is again a great chance for institutional investors to come in. I know Australian investors and superannuation funds from there have experience of investing in the port sector. India is going to come up with a very, very mature PPP concession again here, like we did for asset monetization of NHAI. We would put in all the learnings here to make sure that there is risk is sort of put in only in that bucket where it can be taken. We do not want to have a Ferrari versus Beetle issue again coming in any of our PPP contracts, and that would be used again for our ports as well. If we move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. I spoke about how the domestic aviation market in India has grown at more than 24% at CAGR in the last 4 years pre-COVID. Of course, we already have a significant amount of airport development that has happened in the country, but you would be surprised to know that places like Delhi and Mumbai, which were supposed to be reaching their capacity by 2024, actually did that in 2018 itself, which is why we had to come up with the plan of developing new airports in these areas. So if you look at this one airport in the center, which is called Jewar, just next to Delhi, is a new airport which is being developed at a cost of $3 billion. The contract has already been given out, and so is Navi Mumbai, which is coming next to Mumbai. The plan again here is to privatize existing airports to make sure there is private participation that comes in. Our major airports, which are Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, have significant amount of institutional capital that came in. In addition, we've been able to privatize 6 airports in the past. We have a pipeline of 6 more, which should come in the first or the second quarter of this year. Again, that money would be used for the greenfield airports that we are looking to construct in the country. If I move on to the next slide, I know I won't take too long on smart cities, since I already spoke about the kind of scope that we have here with the 863 million people that will be living in our cities. This is just to give you an expanse of the shortlisted cities. There's work happening on 100 cities in the country. When I talk about work, we're talking about smart metering, smart parking, we're talking about a control center. There's going to be smart water solutions that will be available. This is an area which can be really well established with a lot of Australian companies, considering your experience in your own country. What we are trying to do here at Invest India is to integrate a lot of these projects together at one place. So the entire opportunity across all smart cities is brought together to investors together to show them the expanse and the potential. A lot of this is being done in an EPC model. However, what we've been able to do is a lot of these cities are now coming up with municipal bonds which could be of interest to institutional investors. For example, the city of Pune, which is close to Mumbai, has got its own credit rating, and it has been able to raise municipal bonds, and we'll see a lot of other cities doing something very similar very soon. If we move on, please. Thank you. We did speak about railways, but there's one very interesting opportunity which is also happening on the metros side. India currently has 13 cities which operational metros, 13 where there is metros are under construction, 8 where it's under development, but there are actually more than 50 cities which want one. India has a fairly well developed public transport system in a lot of big cities. However, now tier 2 and tier 3 cities are also looking at development of a significant metro presence in the cities. What is interesting is, if I talk about cities like Delhi, when they built their Delhi metro system, a lot of it came in from support through JICA from Japan, wherein multilaterals came in. Today, we're sitting in a place where we would want to have self-sustainable models. This is actually where we went into details and looked at the Sydney Metro. We looked at what Reliance Rail did there. We know Sydney took a while in building their PPP project, and to be honest, we learned from that. We made sure that we didn't make the same mistakes, and we've come up with learning from, of course, your great experience. We came up with a model for PPP for rolling stock within the country to make sure that we can have a self-sustainable model. We're coming up with various innovative financing models for debt and equity in a lot of these metros to make sure that the construction risk is not passed on to any institutional investor who is ready to provide long-term patient capital in this case as well. If I move on to the next slide, this is a little bit about us, but before I start talking about who we are in a little more detail, I just wanted to say that with this huge opportunity that is available in India for $1.4 trillion, it's very important for us to monetize our assets. We know institutional investors would not come in to take greenfield risk, which is why we are looking at monetization and privatization of a lot of our existing infrastructure assets. In fact, today itself, a list of 100 assets has been shortlisted, which is going to be privatized to recycle that money for brownfield assets. As Invest India, our role has been to make sure that the right kind of opportunity is made available to the right kind of investors. We do have with the monetizations and the privatizations happening, institutional money that can be brought in, wherein as an organization we would want to show you the right kind of opportunity and make sure that the risks that you're ready to take are the only ones which are transferred. There's significant amount of construction opportunity available as well, which we can showcase to Australian companies who would want to start looking at the country. We welcome you to India and would like to say that you can think of us as your partner sitting in the country who'd be very happy to help you through your entire investment cycle here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Prerna. I appreciate that. I guess you all are kind of getting used to those big numbers out there. We do apologize. We're running a bit behind schedule. We're probably going to be compromising a bit on the QA time. I'm hoping that we can maximize that as much as possible. I guess one of the big things we want to take away from here is the entire aspect around the social aspect of the whole thing that you saw there. Because what you're going to be doing by participating in that is the major aspect is going to be about the impact to the social well-being of the entire community there. That's going to be a huge part. With so much emphasis on stakeholder satisfaction, ESG, I think there's no other better opportunity companies would like to be engaged with. Actually, now we'll be getting down to the industry level. As I said earlier, without holding any more time on this, I would like to actually invite Frank from the Macquarie Group, from MIRA, to say a few words. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think I'll just move quickly to the slides just to give you a bit of outline of the business that we have in India, the experience we have, and to that point, the importance of infrastructure to the society and the way that we've been operating our assets. So just moving to the slides, you'll see Macquarie, the next slide, please. Macquarie is a diversified financial institution, and importantly, what we are here to do, and our purpose statement, is to empower people to innovate and invest for a better future. And turning to the next slide, nowhere is that better than what we're doing in India. So if you look at our Indian business, we have in India as an organisation over 1,500 employees working for Macquarie Group. On the next slide. But in addition to that, we have thousands of employees and contractors working at our portfolio companies. We've been in the country now for 15 years, and to be upfront, we've learnt many lessons. It's a hard country, but importantly, it's a rewarding country, and that's why we've made the long-term commitment, not only as an institution with our 1,500 staff there, but through the investments that we've made. In addition to what we do in infrastructure, we have a full-service investment bank, and we are actually one of the largest foreign brokers based in India as well. But importantly, we see ourselves as a part of the community. And in that respect, our foundation has invested very much across very many social causes across the country. So just moving to the next slide in terms of the business that I look after, our infrastructure investing business. This is a list of all of the investments that we've made in infrastructure across the country. It's focused on renewable energy, power, transportation, both in roads and in aviation. And as you can see, over our 15-year history, we have covered the entire country. And what I just wanted to do, and I'm conscious of time, is just to spend a little bit of time on one of the investments that we've made. Moving to the next slide. Oh, sorry, before I get there, just briefly, and I think we just, Prerna did this very well in terms of why are we interested in investing in infrastructure in India. It's very much because of the thematics that she talked about. So I might just move on, just given the timing that we have, and go on to the case study, which is really on the roads that we have. We've been investing in roads in India since 2013, so it's a long history. Initially, we did it with a joint venture partner, a local construction company called Ashoka. And through that, we developed our knowledge of the industry. We obviously are a large investor in toll roads around the world, which many of you are aware of. But India, we thought initially we needed that local partner. But over the time, what we've done is that we've actually invested by ourselves. And most recently, as Prerna said, we were successful in the first large privatisation of toll roads by the National Highways Authority of India in late 2018. And that company is a company that we acquired and we named Safeway Concessions. And Safeway Concessions, the reason why we chose that name was that our aim is not just to have an infrastructure investment for financial returns, but it's to bring world's best practice in terms of operations and, importantly, safety to the Indian road network. From the perspective of our investment, it's a national highway network of 9 roads where we have just under 700 kilometres of roads. Importantly, we're located in key areas for us, which are Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat, 2 economic powerhouses of India, giving us good diversification. And it was a very large investment that we made at about 2 billion Australian dollars. Going to the next slide, I think the key thing that we look to bring in all of our investments, and in particular in emerging countries such as India, is what we call System 7. This is the way in which we operate our investments all around the world. But importantly, it allows us to bring world's best practice. So as an example, just picking one of them, when we look to make an investment, and when you look at this company called Safeway Concessions, it did not exist. There were 0 employees the day we took over the 9 operating toll roads. So we had to create an entire management team around it. So we spent time actually sourcing the right staff. Actually, it ended up being 2 of the key people from Macquarie ended up transferring to become the CEO and CFO of that company, but also using our network to find people who could actually operate the roads. And actually creating a company out of nothing took us only 4 months. And if you go to our head office in Mumbai, you will see literally a head office of 100 people, and we actually now have a control room, like what you'd expect in any other country around the world, where we can find, pick a camera and say, we want to see, kilometre 64 on road 3, and we can actually see what's there. So this is the investment that we have made in that company. But importantly, we are doing that because we do believe it will provide, obviously, a good economic return to our investors, but at the same time, improve what's happening, the infrastructure in the country. So turning to the next slide briefly, I just wanted to mention a few things that we've done. I've talked about the control officers to a certain extent, but we've also improved the safety in terms of how the work zones layouts were. We spent a lot of time with the regulator, the National Highways Authority of India, saying, actually, the concession agreement that we signed up to doesn't work when it comes to safety. because we actually had the obligation to operate the roads 24/7, so many lanes. But we're saying, well, actually, if you want to do maintenance on the median strip, we actually need to be able to close a lane because for the safety of employees. So we actually had to work with the regulators on how we could actually operate these roads better. So it's just one of the examples of what we see. It's not just a financial investment, because as a long-term investor in infrastructure, we know that we need that social license to operate. And in countries like India, we need to bring the international experience that we've developed in terms of how to operate these roads best. And finally, I just wanted to mention one thing on the next slide. We also think about the social aspects as well. Interestingly, when we first acquired the company, as I said, there were no employees, but there was already an existing toll operator. So we actually inherited the toll operators. And we worked out very quickly that every single toll operator was male. And you think, well, why is that the case? So what we did was we did a trial and we went to the local villages where one of our toll booths were and asked why. We found out very quickly that there were a few reasons. Safety was a huge concern. The second concern was actually on sanitary conditions. And so what we decided to do was during the day shift of 8 to 4, we decided to actually make it an all-female toll collection crew. Went out to the villages, spoke to local employers about actually getting females to actually apply. So that first trial, which we did about 2 years ago, is now on 4 of our toll booths, where we actually have all-female crews during the day. And what we found is that, and not to make gross generalisations, but females tend to actually, when they get paid, reinvest in the family. And that's what we've seen. And so the social aspects of that investment has been phenomenal for the local community. So it's just one aspect that I think many people think about infrastructure investment as a financial investment. Of course it is. We're there to make a financial return. But if you think about it in the long term, there are many other returns that you can get, which is critically important. And that's what we and our investors, especially long-term investors who we have, which are the pension funds and sovereign funds of the world, are quite focused on. So I'll just stop there because I'm conscious of time. Thank you.
That's brilliant. It's fascinating. Actually, I mean, the more you look at it and the more the way the things that's being done by Macquarie is just brilliant. I think you keep coming back to the fact it's the opportunity that is there for the large corporations to engage with the activities in India is quite phenomenal. And I think it's just a matter of time. There's going to be a huge transformation in the whole country on that aspect. I would like to next invite Mr. Shailesh Pathak from L&T, IDPL, that's the Infrastructure Development Projects Limited. Actually, I had fascinating introductions for each of you gentlemen, but in view of the time, I'm not going through that. I'll just get Shailesh to come on. Shailesh, please.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, good to be here. For those who are celebrating, happy Mahashivratri. Now, I actually wanted to refer to the comments made by the Indian High Commissioner as well as the Australian Deputy High Commissioner in terms of the stadium that was built where the cricket matches were played. That stadium was built by our company, which is called Larsen & Toubro. It's an 80-year-old company in India. It's in the top 15 construction companies of the world. And if ever you fly from Australia to India, 90% of the time you would be landing in an airport made by Larsen & Toubro. I was talking to the Australian Consul General in Chennai the other day, Sarah, and when she said L&T, she said, of course, my friend Jody used to help you guys in the Delhi airport. So that's what we do. We are almost into every sector that was presented by Invest India. But the point here is, how do we make ideas into cash flow? Yeah, we are in business, right? And there's a return on investment and there's a return on time invested, ROTI, ROI and ROTI. So where is your return on investment and return on time invested the best? And let me just quickly move to my slides. You see, unlike most countries, India's got populations all across its map. And if I can take you through the largest 7 cities, this is Delhi. And this dot here, this very bright dot, is Mumbai. And Delhi and Bombay love each other as much as Sydney and Melbourne love each other. Then we have Madras, which is Chennai now, over here, and Kolkata, Calcutta here. And of course, Bangalore, that Anand claims roots from, and Hyderabad. And then you have a city called Ahmedabad here in Gujarat. And the funny thing is, all 7 cities speak different languages. Just the diversity of India. Before I go into my next map, I want to actually highlight this coastline that you could probably see on your slides. This coastline goes back into the historical connect between India and Australia, which is this coastline. Essentially, we were part of the same landmass, and this is where the division occurred. So we are here in Sydney right now, and of course, you know your city and where you're from. But the more important part is that most of the infrastructure in India is going to be not between the 2 dots, not connecting the dots, but within the dots. So you'll have your trunk infrastructure between Bangalore and Chennai in place in the next 5 years. But Bangalore and Chennai are going to grow massively over the next 2-3 decades. So urban infrastructure is the first theme that the Australian Deputy High Commissioner referred to. Absolutely. So urban infrastructure, transportation, and water. So let's come to that. So most of our infrastructure is not going to happen intercity. The transportation links, the highways, the railways, the gas pipelines, the transmission towers will get taken care of in the next 5 to 10 years. But within these cities, a lot of infrastructure, urban infrastructure will come up. And this gives you a sense of the kind of size of Indian cities vis-a-vis Australian cities. You can see Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and Adelaide. Well, let me just say this. A 15-year down the line number, almost all these cities will double in size and population. So therefore, where should your return in investment, where should your time be invested in? My list is this, right? In Larsen & Toubro, we have set up an ambitious business line called Smart World and Cities. We are already present in most of these 100 smart cities that we talked about. Talking about my own company, which is L&T IDPL, I'll stop sharing this presentation. You have these slides. So L&T IDPL effectively is the development platform for the Larsen & Toubro Group. And we invest in infrastructure assets. So from start to finish, we did the Bangalore airport, we did the Hyderabad metro, and we've done several in collaboration with Australian partners. In May 2018, we did the most successful infrastructure investment trust for India. It's called InInfraVit, which has 3 large global investors. And in our own company, 49% of the shareholding is with Canada's largest pension fund. Going forward, there are 3 kinds of ways that we can create mutual cash flow. One is the brain power that you have, so in advisories or consulting. The second is products or services or technologies that you have that we can use and vice versa. And the third is Australian dollars. So I'm very happy to see Nick Kemp's bio, because I explained the difference between caterpillars and butterflies in Indian infrastructure, I think a year and a half ago, to the Australian super delegation. I'm so happy that they've put some Australian dollars to work in our NIIF. Anyone wants to reach me on how to create mutual value? Anand has my details. Thanks very much. Look forward to the questions and answers. Bye.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Shailesh. That's really appreciated. That was amazing. The opportunities again with L&T, I think there's a lot of information available out there, but if you do require any specific information about them, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll be delighted to share some information. I would actually, on that point, get Nick Kemp on board, an Australian super. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anand. And just given time, I will probably keep it relatively short and just talk through our journey at Australian Super through India, and probably potentially controversially, we've been investing in India for 10 to 15 years now, and it didn't start off too well for us. We had a few sort of spluttering starts. We invested there with probably the wrong partner. And we find it's really important to invest with people and organisations that see investments in this the same way we do and are incentivised to get the returns that we're after as well. The managers that we invested with invested into pretty complex structures. They had minority stakes in some vehicles, which meant that the manager wasn't able to sufficiently influence the way some of these assets were going. And finally, what we found is that some of the process, some of the bureaucracy to sort of get through the system was quite long and expensive. So that was sort of 10 or 15 years ago. And I might just sort of take a step back to explain a little bit about Australian Super, where we're the largest superannuation fund in Australia with a bit over $200 billion of funds under management. That's doubled in the last 5 years. And looking forward over the next 5 to 7 years, we're thinking it'll probably double again. That growth has come from just more members sort of joining Australian Super, which is, I suspect, largely driven off the returns that we bring, being the number one fund in Australia for the last 5, 7, 10 and actually 20 years as well. But we sat back and we said, look, given the growth that we're seeing in the fund, where is a great place to invest that has these attributes? And as we've sort of heard numerous times today, it's very hard not to look at India and realise that the growth there, not just the population growth and the fact that it's probably going to be the largest, most populous country in the world within a few years, the age of the working population that's been mentioned, but perhaps most of the point, which is excellently mentioned earlier today, is the reforms that have gone on, particularly over the last 5 to 8 years. Things like the tax reforms that we've seen, the removal of some of the foreign ownership restrictions that we've seen, and as Frank mentioned, some of the technology that we've seen come into India, so the automation on toll roads, the smart metering that goes into power. Some of this stuff actually is really material when it comes to looking at a place to invest. And it was within those confines, when we looked at the reform that was going on and also the growth, that we thought that let's sort of recut how we do invest in India and do it in a way that is really going to do it in a way that's going to be in sync with what the country's going to do. And as was just mentioned, we stumbled on the National Investment Infrastructure Fund, NIIF, which is it's actually quite an amazing organisation, the way it's been set up, and you really have to compliment the Indian government as to how that's been done. And I should add that I've had 2 countries come and approach me in the last couple of years looking to set up their own NIIF, and I suspect other countries will be doing so in the future. But what that is, it's an organisation that's 49% owned by the Indian government and 51% owned by private sector, and the private sector owners include both local investors as well as the largest pension and sovereign wealth funds around the world. And there's a really strong incentive going back to the partners of that organisation to invest in India, to ensure that what we are doing is it being able to get the returns out of the infrastructure assets that we're investing there, but also doing what's really great for the country and really needed for the country. And so it's very early days. We've only been invested there in a few years, but the fact that we do have sufficient governance and the ability to talk at a really high level with both the government and also the people within NIIF about the particular projects they're looking at, about particular reforms that the country's undertaking, is incredibly pleasing in terms of the transparency that we're able to receive with that sort of investment. So now when we look through, we've probably got we've got a bit over $1.5 billion invested in India. The hope is that as our fund grows and as our infrastructure program grows from 20 to 40 billion over the next 4 or 5 years, that our investment in India will potentially double. And that's across infrastructure, private equity, as well as the listed equity. So it's very early days for us for our review of investing in India, but we're certainly very excited about it and hope to do a lot more of it in the near term. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Greatly appreciate it. One of the key things about infrastructure when we started to put this program together was to also focus on what we were discussing about smart infrastructure, where we actually incorporate technology into the way the infrastructure functions. We did look around for a few companies to talk to, and Infosys actually was quite gracious to actually come on board and share a couple of success stories, what they were doing in terms of campuses or precincts. So actually, Vikas will be sharing with us. It'll be very similar to what you were talking earlier today during your speak, Troy, in terms of precincts when you're talking the smart technologies that are incorporated. Some of the examples that Infosys can do. This is a space I think that Indian companies, especially within the technology space, can look and see how they can integrate with some of the activities that are happening here. And we could probably take some of the success stories back to India in time. So Vikas, thank you.
Thank you, Anand. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
And a very good evening and good afternoon to all of you. I think a lot of insights have been shared by experts in the last hour or so, highlighting the opportunities which exist in the physical infrastructure space. For next 5 minutes, I would like to actually converge the physical and the digital infrastructure and touch upon something what Anand was talking about, smart infrastructure. As I believe, the case continues to remain very, very compelling to make our infrastructure smart. In fact, in one of the studies, Professor Hussain of Swinburne University shared that the benefit to cost ratio for the technology approach is on an average 9 to 1. So for every dollar that the taxpayer invests, the return on that investment is approximately $9. And even IDC has predicted that global smart infrastructure, smart cities, market size is expected to grow from US $400 billion from 2020 to US $800 billion by 2025. So there is a $1.4 trillion opportunity in the physical infrastructure space, as shared by His Excellency. But there is equally large opportunity which exists in making that infrastructure smart as well. So what essentially we are talking about when we are making the infrastructure smart, while this word smart can be used to describe many things, for the economic marketplace, this simple word has taken on a more significant meaning, specifically to describe connected devices, buildings, campuses, infrastructures, and connected cities as well. And we are not far, when we'll start talking about connected countries. Which are essentially enabled through technologies like IoT, 5G, cloud computing, so on and so forth. So with the ultimate goal to enhance the quality of life, and if you can go to the next slide, please. For our citizens and for residents in a sustainable and a collaborative manner, and by improving the efficiencies across all touch points between citizens, governance, and the environment, is where we believe smart infrastructure, smart cities need to consider these features, which you can see on your screen right now. In interest of time, I'll just touch upon one or two. I will not go through the whole list. We have discussed about smart cities. Prerna touched upon it a little bit, and so has Sailesh. So smart buildings, which are an integral part, being it the commercial or being it residential, is one of the feature definitely which needs consideration, because the reports indicate that by 2025, buildings would be the highest consumers of energy. However, nearly 50% of the energy or water consumed by buildings are often wasted. So thus, any smart city initiative which should focus on optimizing energy consumed by buildings need to be an integral part of it. So the areas or the features what you see on the screen right now are the areas where the opportunity exists. And one very important feature, of all these features, what I call is smart citizens. While this is not related to technology, it is the most vital aspect of smart cities. Digital initiatives and smart communities will only work when there is true engagement, adoption, and participation amongst the citizens. At Infosys, we are doing our bit. If you can go to the next slide, please. We are a global next-gen digital services and consulting company with more than 250,000 employees across the world. If you can go to the next slide, please. So to help our customers, we have joined Qualcomm's Smart City Accelerator program to offer end-to-end solutions for things like smart stadiums, smart venues, smart event management, and things like that. And we ourselves, if we can go to the next slide, we ourselves are an example of smart city initiatives where we have transformed our campus to smart campuses, thereby reducing our per capita energy consumption by over 55% through energy efficiency programs. We have the highest number of green buildings spanning a total of 12 million square feet. And in FY 2019, 44% of our electricity requirements were met from the renewable energy sources, which included about 49 megawatt from our own solar plants. And we also have a portfolio of large community-based carbon offset programs, which gives benefit to over 100,000 families today, contributing to socio-economic development of rural India. So in interest of time, I would just reiterate that the opportunity to make the infrastructure still remains in front of us, and it is an immense opportunity. With the use of the technology, the world is becoming increasingly interconnected and intelligent. However, what we see is that one-sided top-down approach that focuses merely on monetizing technology will not succeed. So it is very, very important to design any such initiative, keeping the citizens and the residents at its heart to drive a consistent and continuous engagement. So I'll stop there for today. Thanks a lot for hearing me out. Over to you, Anand.
Thanks, Vikas. Thank you. And I think most interestingly, time and again, we have heard the speakers today touch on the social aspect, because I think there was, some of us actually do talk about it. There was a huge emphasis on shareholder returns. I think the language is becoming quite common now. It's about stakeholder returns, stakeholder satisfaction. We've seen some brilliant examples from Frank here today, what he's sharing, and what Vikas was mentioning earlier. And I think almost every large corporation is looking at engaging. I think L&T has got a huge story of its own. So I think it actually provides a great platform for companies wanting to engage from both sides to see what difference we can make and how we can actually make the entire living better for the communities in which we operate. There's a term that I used to work for a company called Hitachi till very recently, and we had a term called social innovation. The term social innovation came about when we actually brought about this as a brand for the organization in 2010. The entire focus was around building communities or to contribute to the well-being of the societies in which we operate. It was based on that. The entire principle of the organization was based on those very few values. And I think the more large corporations can look at it, and the smaller organizations become a part of the journey, I think it's going to be just a wonderful story for people ahead, especially our future generations. It's going to be amazing for them. Thankfully, we got another 20 minutes, I think, for question and answers. I actually like to open up the room for some questions. If anybody, I must admit, there was an opportunity for Frank here, and actually L&T, Silas is quite keen to answer any questions you have. I'm sure Troy and Nick and everybody else will be very keen to answer your questions. Please don't hesitate to raise your hand. We have people on the standby here. We have a couple of questions online. I will also bring them up as we speak. So I would like to just give an opportunity for people in the room. Anybody wants to ask a question? Great. Can we get a mic out there, please?
Thank you. This was a very enlightening presentation. I have a very simple question. My name is Natasha, and I'm General Manager with Newland Global Group. It's an advisory firm. We work primarily in the Australia-India trade and investment space. And our focus is how do we really build on these bilateral ties between both countries. Now, one of our experience in the space of infrastructure has been how do we attract more investment, both sides, be it Australia or be it India. Now, if we look at the figures, currently we are saying 0.6% of outbound investment to India, which is way less if you compare this with Luxembourg, Bermuda, PNG, or even Netherlands. So my question is to Nick. I just want to understand the psyche of superannuation funds in Australia. What is it that is going to excite them about India apart from the opportunity story? What is it that they will look at, looking at the huge assets which superannuation funds have, including Australian Super, which has $192 billion. What more can be done to excite them about the Indian market?
Nick, yeah, please.
It's a pretty big thing to ignore the opportunity in India, I think, and to be honest, that is huge. The question I'd probably flip it around the other way and say, why aren't more Australian superannuation funds investing in India? Because we are definitely one of the ones at the forefront of doing so. And I did touch on some of those reforms, which are still relatively new. They're sort of 4 or 5 years old. I think what you're going to find is as those reforms really start to bite, really start to kick in, and at the same time, that growth story, I think that's playing out. Everyone can see that. But you put those two together and the opportunities will really start to present themselves. The other thing that I didn't really touch on is the inflation and the interest rate side of what's going on in India. And you might recall that it's coming down. It has bubbles on the way, but over the last 10 years, it's undoubtedly come down. That bit of it's actually really important when it comes to some of the cross-currency trades that we need to make when we invest offshore. It actually makes India more and more competitive as it comes down. So that is something that we definitely look at. And as I said, I think we're going to keep investing in India in the years to come.
Thanks. I hope that answered your question, Basha. Thank you, that was good. Anybody else, please? Have a question? Actually, there's a question online. Did somebody raise a hand there? No. I had a question here from one of the participants online, actually, Shiva. I think a lot of you know about her. This is a question directed at Invest India. So, Prerna, if you're there, it's basically about if I think probably carries on from the previous question in terms of from India's perspective, the largest investments coming into India and the stories behind that. What's the reason for the success in that space? And what is it that's actually helping that happen into India? So you probably want to share that, Prerna.
Sure. Thank you so much, Anand. Thanks, Shiva, for the question. So, if I put it categorically and considering our focus is infrastructure, I'm really talking about the institutional money that has come into the country. And I think one country which really took advantage of the opportunity that India was offering was Canada. There is significant amount of long-term patient capital from Canada which has come into the country. To put it in numbers, Canada has all funds in Canada manage more than $1.5 trillion. There are 12 major funds from 3 provinces, British Columbia, Ontario and Quebec, who manage this money. Out of these 12, 9 have actually come into the country directly. So I think, one way is, of course, the traditional way of coming in through GPs, which works really well when one wants to enter the country. The other model is to come in on your own as LPs and then partner and co-invest along with LPs to create platforms in the country. I think, when a lot of Canadians were looking at the country, they came in, they took large bets, they established partnerships, they created portfolio companies, and they've invested more than $40 billion already. One more thing that they did was, they took a long-term bet instead of course, there are concerns. We are still an emerging market. If somebody talks about hedging costs in India, they're significantly high. Most of the Canadian pensions, when they've invested in India, they actually either have a natural hedge or they've taken a long-term unexposed, exposed currency rupee exposure on their books, which is something that in a longer term has helped them, and some of them have actually created an IRR of over 30% with the exits that they've seen in the country. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Prerna. That's a good example to share, actually. We got a hand up there, please. Yes, can you get a mic here? Oh, we got two. Yeah, please, go ahead.
I have a question. It's a serious question and also a half not serious question. Certainly, to the Indian panel, your pathways in terms of your country, we just got destroyed in cricket by you.
Oops.
And we were destroyed by your third 11. Is that what we're about to see for the next 10 years as an Australian fan? And so, my serious question is that part of what's going on in India in terms of what you're doing in terms of your pathways in education, not just in your principal love of sport and cricket?
With your permission, Consul General, and can I direct this question to Sailesh? Sailesh, are you there?
Yeah, I am. I think the Aussies did a pretty good job of destroying us in the first time. And then we bounced back. That's going to happen more and more with most countries. I would just like to suggest that if you looked at my pinned tweet, it very clearly shows how in the global 10 economies in the world, India entered the group in 2009, and it'll hit by 2030, it'll hit number 3. So what's really happening is the effect of compounding. And since we're talking about infrastructure, I remember when India did not have too many 4-lane roads, and now we are looking at interstate-like expressways. The only thing I'll say here is that a simple example in terms of what Frank mentioned about electronic tolling. We run a large portfolio of road assets. We generate around $1 million US every day as cash. And in November 2016, only 2% was electronic tolling. In this week, it is 94%. So that's just over 4 years. I can give you another statistic. Today, probably India is the quickest way to transfer money from mobile phone to mobile phone. We started the unified payment interface in 2017, early 2017. Last month, we did 2.3 billion transactions. And a lot of things are happening in India which do not get reported upon. Last fortnight, I was in some villages in one of the poorest parts of our country. And I went into these villages. Each household, and especially I asked the women, each woman was so delighted that she had a household water tap connection and a gas cylinder to cook her food on. And this is saving considerable time for the lady of the house. So a lot of these million mutinies going on in India are going to compound into the next 10 years. Quite frankly, the next 10 years are going to be better than the last 30. Thanks.
Yeah, actually, that's amazing. I mean, thank you so much for sharing this. I mean, that's brilliant. Actually, it goes on. I don't know if you heard after the last Test match in Australia when the coach was talking about the game. You say this is a work that's gone on for 10 years. It didn't happen overnight. I always tell that to even companies who are actually, like I was telling Troy earlier, there's a company that's doing pretty well now, but that did not happen overnight in a year. It took about 8 years of work for what you're seeing now. So it's the same thing. It's a lot of effort, time. You got to work with it. I have one question, but I would like to actually direct it to, this is online. Actually, sorry, you had a mic. You were waiting for a question. So please let me have you. Yeah.
I'm Salvatore Babonis at the University of Sydney. I know that many Indian states and union territories have now reached 100% electricity penetration, but often it's without 24-hour electricity. I'm wondering what the timeline is to get India towards 100% penetration, 24-hour electricity, given that electricity is so central to all aspects of economic development. And that may be for Ms. Prarna or for the High Commissioner. I'm not sure who might be able to answer that.
Or me, maybe. Yeah.
I'll give a choice if. Pardon?
So let me
Prerna.
quickly answer
Yep.
this, Anand.
Prerna?
Let me quickly answer this, Anand.
Oh,
The
great.
100%
Certainly.
target has been reached, and it was reached in 2019 in terms of electrifying all habitations. Availability of power is pretty close to 23 out of 24 hours in the poorest parts of India. So power cuts are now not very common. Prerna, if you want to add.
No, that's all I wanted to say, Shailesh. We've done 100% electrification. 100% electrified is something that we're almost there. The target was 2023 to do it, but actually sitting in 2021, we can safely say that we're almost there. We've reached the target. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Prerna and Shailesh, for that. Much appreciated. This is a question, actually, one of these small IT companies were asking a question towards, I don't know, Troy, if you want to take this question, or Nick, to do with the MSMEs companies can support Australian utilities infrastructure companies. So how can Indian IT, MSME, small, medium enterprises support the Australian utility infrastructure companies? Who is the first person to come? So would you be able to answer that? Or yeah, please.
Not exactly my line of business, but you might have noticed yesterday that it was announced that Invest New South Wales was set up, which is a one-stop shop, basically for any interested business with business potential in New South Wales. It would work as well in terms of the ability to actually work with at least the New South Wales utility companies to come in. So I can provide that contact for you. Yeah.
Great. So this person is online, who's obviously heard your answer. So
oh, okay, fantastic. Yeah.
Prashant.
Oh, come straight through to me and I'll put you in the right place.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Any other questions? Actually, we're getting hands up. You're fine. Guys, I think we can take one more question after that and we'll close.
Thank you, Anand. It's been fabulous to hear all of you and just positive energy as well, both sides. I must also acknowledge that AMP Capital has invested into the power transmission, about 150 million there in India, which is, again, transformational investment, yes. I believe. Taking the cricket parlance and the bonhomie there, we want to see more of Indian in the Big Bash League. And just as the infrastructure space, question for Shailesh, when do we see L&T, Shapoorji and others here batting here as well? Shailesh, over to you. What are the aspirations there?
The easy answer, whenever we think that we can make serious money and do good for the Australian economy. Well, look, it works both ways. Continuing with the cricket, it is not till the IPL, the Indian Premier League, that we got international talent performing in Indian geographies. And to that extent, young Indians really picked up from all the wonderful Aussies that came to play here. So thank you for that transfer of technology. The same way we will carry our technology and our business to Australia to make more money and to provide ESG to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, please. Sir, there will be a last question.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for a great set of conversations. My name is Amitabh Mal. I'm a senior partner with BCG based in Sydney. And in my role, I end up serving a lot of very large Australian corporations. And I have a question for you, Frank, but let me give you the context first. When I talk to my clients, everyone's very excited about the India opportunity. The data that we saw today, it's not new data. It's become bigger and bigger over the last 10 years, but the story has been there for a while. But there's always a bit of, and maybe it's history, maybe it's the missteps of the past, but people are always a little scared. I was quite impressed with the story of Macquarie over a period of time, having invested, sustained, and actually seeing the benefits. What lessons would you share in terms of what should people be wary of, but also what should they be excited by in a journey like that?
Excellent. Thank you. Great question.
Thanks for that question. I think Nick answered it partially as well, that I think, in terms of the lessons, partners, and who your partners were is a critical issue. And to be upfront, our most recent investments, we own 100%. It doesn't mean we don't have local partners who you deal with, contractors and the rest, but having the ability to control the investments has been absolutely critical. As Nick said, our initial investments, most were minority, and we almost spent more time, what I would call, on co-shareholder management than actually managing the underlying business. So I think that's something which, it doesn't mean we haven't had good partners, but partner selection has been, probably one of the key things. And I think also to Nick's point, the reforms have made a huge difference because there was obviously the feeling that there's a lot of bureaucracy, and things like the tax reforms have made a huge difference. The fact that there are now bankruptcy laws has made a huge difference. But the thing is, it does take time for it to actually go through the system. So only now are we seeing the IBC go through bankruptcies and see what actually happens as these processes occur. So I think it's only time, and then as more institutional investors, as the likes of AusSuper and the rest come into the market, I do think that provides the validation. But when you're investing in infrastructure, you're investing not for 12 months, it's not private equity or 5 years, you have to be there for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And I do think it will take time to show the results, and then that will kind of create, the additional momentum. But we're definitely, on a positive momentum right now. And, we're speaking to investors around the world who, to Nick's point, you can't ignore India. So the question is, you don't want to ignore it. So the question is, how can you actually benefit from it? So how can you actually adapt? And I think the stories we talk about, and I'm very upfront, we talk about a lot of the mistakes that we've made, because it is important to actually show that you've learnt from, the last, for us, 15 years investing in the country.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you so much. In fact, one of the points you mentioned there, if you look at the conversation that's happened, especially between the two governments, they're talking about long-term strategic relationship. Infrastructure actually provides, it's a perfect impetus to that, because the relationship in infrastructure is not like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. You're talking about 15, 20, 30 odd years. So it provides a perfect platform for that. With that, actually, you're just coming close to the formal end of the evening. I will be inviting Vice Chair of AIBC to do the closing address. But before that, personally, having brought this event up together with a few gentlemen in this room here from the High Commission, Dr. Sriram and Mr. Sanjay from the Consul General's office, Consul General himself, and the High Commissioner's team from Canberra, I would like to acknowledge your support and contribution through this entire process to AIBC. This is my personal thing, but Sanushka will do the formal thing. But I also, the couple of gentlemen I did want to, my AIBC team, my colleagues have been great help through this process. I also want to acknowledge a couple of people, couple of companies for that matter. Infosys is one of them, and another company, though they are not online today, the Hiranandani Group from India, the multi-billion-dollar company in the real estate and construction company. They were so gracious in terms of participating in the company, allowing us to make the decisions in terms of their participation, engaging with the stakeholders, the graciousness with which they were willing to share their ideas, making contributions, but being in the background. That was quite amazing. I thought that's some of the best things I've seen through this entire process as we were organizing this event. I do like to thank them sincerely for their contributions and their humility in the way they managed the whole process. With that, actually, I would like to get Sanushka to come, our Vice Chair for AIBC, to do the closing address. Thank you, Sanushka.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I fully accept my limitations, so I'm not going to give you any cricket analogies. To sum up, from what I've taken on today, partnerships, so the good, the bad, and the ugly of the partnerships, perseverance and a commitment to the cause are key to successfully undertaking infrastructure investment in India. The opportunities are real, live, and growing rapidly. Even the most likely players to succeed have had their challenges, but these challenges were not insurmountable and were definitely able to be overcome. And I'm going to actually throw you two guys under the bus, because Barry and I have been speaking about how we don't hear too often about the success stories about India. So often in the conversations that we have around Australia and India doing more, we talk about all the bad stories from 10, 15 years ago. But we're not hearing enough about you guys. So I'm going to be sending him your presentations, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from him. There are organizations who are able to help navigate the opportunities. So Invest India, FICCI, CII, DFAT, Austrade, and the AIBC. And on that note, on behalf of Jim Varghese, the National Chair, who is unfortunately not able to be here, he's in Queensland, thank you for joining us today for the launch of our infrastructure chapter. Full credit to Anand and his team in bringing today together. I think we've all learned a lot. Thank you to the High Commissioner. Thank you to the Consul General for your support, as always, for hosting us so generously. Our key relationships for their support and engagement, so DFAT, Austrade, FICCI, Invest India, our government and industry experts for their inputs today. And I guess we'll hopefully be seeing you all at our next infrastructure event, where we will hopefully have more success stories. Thank you.
The people at the back, there's food out there. Please help yourself. You can actually get the food back to the table.